1, 2, 3, 4. Welcome to Crazy Chester. Welcome to Crazy Chester. Crazy Chester's Radio Hour. Welcome to Crazy Chester. Welcome to Crazy Chester. Crazy Chester's Radio Hour. Yeah, Crazy Chester's Radio Hour. Crazy Chester's Radio Hour.
Welcome to the Crazy Chester Radio Hour. My name is Andreas Werner. I'm a record producer, songwriter, and owner of Crazy Chester Records. The theme song you just heard is performed by Wet Willie's Jimmy Hall and Funky Chester. Funky Chester is drummer Lynn Williams, bassist Paul Osola, and myself on guitar. The Crazy Chester Radio Hour is a weekly music talk podcast featuring an eclectic group of guests with musical hearts, minds, and souls. And many of the episodes will dive deep into the rich history of music Mecca Muscle Shoals. My guest today is Chance Martin, aka Alamo Jones. Chance was the longtime sidekick of both Johnny Cash and Cowboy Jack Clements and has been living a most interesting life in and around music, as you will soon learn. He's a larger-than-life character and best known for hosting the Alamo Jones Show on Sirius XM's Outlaw Country channel. Please welcome to the Crazy Chester Radio Hour, the man, the myth, the legend, Chance Martin, a.k.a. Alamo Jones, the voice in black. Chance, thank you so much for being my guest today.
Well, thank you, Andreas. You go by that name on the show, don't you?
Yeah.
Okay.
I do.
Well, you know that me and you have something in common. In a way, we're both in this business, number one. But number two, that what excited me was I said one day, where are you from, Andreas? And you said, Zurich, Switzerland. And I said, is the Atlantis Hotel still there? You know, I stayed there in the 70s with Johnny Cash show. And you said, yeah. And it really surprised me, and they kind of fixed it up. And so we had that in common, that you actually, I love Zurich a lot, and you're from there. So I thought, I've got to like this guy. So it's good to see you.
Yeah, and I was surprised to find out that a hotel key of that hotel is at the Storytellers Museum in Bon Aqua, courtesy of you.
Well, I collected all the keys on the Johnny Cash tour. I did 2 world tours, and I kept the keys. You know, they don't make keys anymore. They're plastic now. So I don't know if I didn't really sense that coming, but I just kept the keys for my own personal, I didn't have time to get souvenirs. So that was my souvenir. And I had them all in one briefcase, and then they took the whole briefcase full of the 2 world tours. And it's not in the Storytellers, it's at Johnny Cash's farm, which is down the street, his hideaway farm, and the original log house John lived in that he owned for 30-something years down in Bon Aqua, and 107 beautiful acres. And they got where he parked his car in the garage, they rebuilt that and made it into Cinnamon Hill, which is like Johnny Cash's name of his house in Jamaica. Now, I spent 2 weeks in Jamaica with John, and he wanted to learn how to take photographs. So I taught him. And so this museum has got the keys in it, and it's called Cinnamon Hill, which pictures that John, his first picture that he took, as I taught him. And he had the eye, man. He could do it. So it was a lot easier for him because he automatically fell in love with it. And it was his first real hobby in his life. And so we spent 2 weeks taking photographs, and I got a lot of great photos of him. They're in there in the museum. And we killed the biggest crocodile in the East Indies there in Jamaica. And Roger Moore had stalked him. You know who he is.
James Bond.
Yeah. And he was named One-Eyed Jack. And he was the biggest one, but he killed little crocs. And so they really wanted to get rid of him. And before Roger Moore, Steve McQueen tried to get him years before that. And he had one eye put out in a croc fight, say. So if you were hunting for him at night with an aircraft landing light on a jet, on an airboat with an airplane engine, they'll go fast, but so can a croc, you know. But that's a long story. Now they're a picture of the croc and all the teeth. And John took out and made a necklace. That's in the museum as well. So, you know, if you want to see and feel Johnny Cash, you go to his farm where he wrote songs, spent a lot of his time. And he would go down to a little country store that he bought. And at one time, it was a post office a couple of times. It was real old. Then it was a recording studio. And then it was back to being a little store. And it had a little stage in this old store. And then John bought it. It was no longer a store, but it had still a little stage in it. And he would invite Hickman County, where it's at, to come down and free. And he would sing to them when he was off tour, free. And try his new songs and let other people sing. And it became a Saturday night in Hickman County with Johnny Cash. You know, it's really something that this guy that now owns the farm and it kept it in Johnny Cash's life. And now they're both museums, and they put on a show down there on Wednesday through Saturday at the Storytellers Museum. Just like John, just carrying the tradition on. And Tommy Cash plays down there some. And, you know, it's a lot of fun, man. You'd have to go check it out, me and you.
Absolutely. And you've been associated with and friends with Johnny Cash for a long time. I think it goes back when you were 23 years old.
Right.
And you applied for a job on the Johnny Cash TV show. So how did you want to work for him, and how did your relationship with him get started?
Well, it's magical, really. I was hanging out at WMAK, a radio station here in Nashville, because I had just finished went to radio school to be an announcer, studied public speaking and all of that, and I was going to be a disc jockey. And so I'm hanging around up there, and my mother called me and said, your daddy, my dad, had me an appointment, audition for a job. He was at the Ramada Inn here on James Robinson and Parkway in Nashville. And he overheard some people talking, and they had all gathered, Screen Gems and ABC had gathered and rented the whole bottom floor of the Ramada Inn and had their offices there. So they were getting ready to do the first Johnny Cash summer replacement show is what it was, right, at first. And then, of course, it became a regular network show. Now I went down and auditioned for it. I was already not far from it. And my mama said, Dad wants you to come home and put on a suit to chance. You know. And I said, well, I'm not going to come all the way to South Nashville and put on a suit and audition for a job. I'm already down here. So I just went down and I got the job. You know, they had hired a bunch of people to do cue cards. And they had fired them already. They hired them, and they just couldn't do it, and they fired them. So they started auditioning. You know, they were panicking. And my dad had told him, said, I got the perfect guy for you, my son. He can do it. And so I went down and performed I've never even seen a cue card. And did it. I was good at printing, which helped. And so that very day, I met Johnny Cash down in the little meeting room. He came down just to talk about the first show, who Bob Dylan was on, you know. So when John walked in the room, the first time I ever seen him in person in my life in 1969 at 23, there was something about him that just lifted me up. His charisma, his personality, his awareness, and his voice and his mannerisms, that all lit me up. And I thought, I like this man. He's really, really something about him. So I was really paying attention, you know, and did my job good. And, of course, I had other people doing cue cards. You know, I hired my own people. So then I just the only one that would do Johnny's. You know, when they had duets or more than one, you had to have two sets. So I always did John, so I got to know him real good, and he got to trust in me, you know. So that relationship built, and then when the show come back, you know, 2 seasons, you know, I worked 58 one-hour shows at the Ryman Auditorium with no air conditioning. And man, that summer replacement was hot, you know, with all those lights on in there, them rats running around hitting them goo-goo clusters and popcorn boxes. It was crazy. And, but I tell you what, it was the greatest time of my life, you know. And after 58 shows, Johnny Cash said, wasn't no chance, he said, I can't see you being unemployed. I want you to come out there and go to work for me at the House of Cash. So I went out there and listened to tapes in the publishing house for a long time. And then, you know, he bought that House of Cash. It was a Plantation Dinner Theater. So before all of that, though, before he moved his offices in there, he had them in a duplex behind it he owned by the railroad track. And he put me in there with Bob Wooten, his lead guitar player. And I said, I really don't want to live with anybody that close, John. What else you got? You know, anything? So he moved me into Plantation Dinner Theater. He said, I just bought that. It still had all the beds in it where the actors slept. So, you know, I had a different bed every night, and I could work in there at night and put a slideshow together for his tour that I was planning on getting that job someday. And it went on, and I got to do two world tours with him and became his lighting director and did his new souvenir book for the bicentennial. And as time went along, on the second printing, he wanted some of his photographs in there. So, you know, it was quite fun, really. And so I kind of invented a lot of special lighting back then and effects that country music's never seen, because I'd worked rock concerts with the big stars for 15 years also. And I didn't want to take away from John. I just wanted to get up there with him with the lighting, you know. So knowing how to do that and knowing the artist is not that big a challenge. It's just getting it even, you know. And they loved what I did, and Carl Perkins loved it. He was along. So over all those years, man, I just knew all the legends in country music. You know, working television shows. I worked the first, 15 CMA award shows. You know, last night was our, 51st, you know. Makes me feel old.
But I guess around the same time, Johnny Cash gave you his Martin D35 guitar. How did that come about?
Well, the very 1970, the first full season, John had just got that guitar, and it had all the inlay of acorns and leaves up on the neck, and it was, you know, the best sounding guitar I've ever heard. And but he would just leave it at the show and just go home after we'd finish. But at this time, I'm working the TV show. I don't work and leave and go out to his place and work out there. I go home to my own place. Now, Johnny would leave that guitar, and you know what happens after the show? They tear all the television stuff out, part of the stage, and put it back to normal so they can have a Grand Ole Opry. Where's that guitar gonna go? It's gonna get stolen or broke. I took it home, put it in the case and took it home every night, brought it back with me when I came in to do the rehearsal with John, tuned it, set it, and handed it to him. I did that the whole time to the 58 show. I told him, I said, I'm taking it home. I wrote a song, my first song on it already. He published it, called Loser Till You Win. And I went on to write 4 or 5 songs, I think, he published. And at the end of the 58 show, the last one, it was over. He handed me the guitar as a gift and signed his name on it. I asked him to. And I got him to sign the back of it. He didn't want to sign it on the front, so I said, sign the back. And I kept it 14 years, and I wrote that album, that rock album, and played it. It's an album called In Search, by chance.
And we'll talk about that some more, too.
And he called me up and he said, Chance, that Martin guitar that I gave you a long time ago, he said, I want to write this song called Man in White, and I want to use that guitar to write with. And I said, well, John, the guitar don't have any more songs left in it for me. And I just can't keep it in tune, and there's nothing worse than that for me, I'm not in love with the guitars like some people. I appreciate the quality of this and what it is and who it came from, but I'll just give it back to you, and you give me another one. And I got a Gibson Gospel, and I kept that. But anyway, the guitar, I said, when I told John this, he was just listening to me like maybe I had a drink or something, but listen to this. I said, John, besides the guitar not having any songs in it anymore, for me, it could go, that could happen to you with the Man in White, but I'm not to question that. I said, but the guitar it's got a lot of energy for some reason, and it's hard to explain. So anyway, took the guitar to him, and 2 days later he calls me up and says, hey, Chance, he said, the Martin guitar, he said, I had it in my bedroom both nights, and he said, it blew up in the middle of the night and woke me up and scared me to death. It made quite a noise. The bridge blew off of it. And I said, well, I told you, John, it had a lot of energy. And he laughed. But, and I said, well, I can't help you with that, man. I don't repair guitars. And anyway, we got a laugh out of it about the energy thing he did. He said, I think you were right, son. So I don't know if he wrote the Man in White on it or not. Now, I think he wrote a Man in White, but then he had the book, Man in White. So it ended up in the Country Music Hall of Fame. And that's where I wanted it. It was going to end up there anyway when I got tired of it. And it ended up there, so that's the end of that story. At least the public get to see it now.
Yeah. And I guess towards the end of the 70s, you kind of started what became the In Search album. Would you mind telling us a little bit about like the genesis of that, and I guess the local that you call the Dead Ends, and how that all kind of came together?
Okay. Well, uh, well, about in the middle of me working with John and touring, when I was home from between tours, I was talking to my dad and mama, and I said, "Why don't we get y'all another house?" See, I was still kind of hanging out there, and I had an apartment, but I had found this house right down the street from their house on a dead end that had this huge bonus room. And my dad, I took him down there, and Mom showed him through it. So they sold their house and bought that. The purpose I wanted was the big bonus room. I wanted to build me a music room there. So after 2 world tours, I just could not take any more of the road. You know, I was burnt out. And I mean, Johnny Cash worked 90 minutes a day, and I worked 18 hours a day. And of course, I asked John, I said, "What's the hardest part of all of this, when this road, tour thing?" And he said, "It's getting to and from." And I found that out, that'll wear you out. And so after, I guess, 2 world tours were up and bicentennial was done, the end of that, I quit and stopped, because I could work television shows, I could work movies, and I wouldn't have to travel no more. And I wanted to build a music room. I had the Martin guitar. So as I started, my parents moved in, and I started fixing this room up, me and a friend. I put a stage in it, a little stage, and I put a big bar and a desk and some file cabinets, and I made an office and put all the pictures on the wall, painted it flat black, and put a moonroof on it, and bars on the windows, security at the doors, and you had to have a phone to pick it up, and then a little red light come on. Then I started putting a band together. And that was the hardest part. It took me a year to put a band together. They'd come and go. But once I got the lead guitar player that I loved, that inspired me to write, more. And then I got the rest of the guys, and we were together for almost 5 years. And we never played anywhere except in the dead end in that bonus room. And we recorded everything we did in there, every rehearsal. And after a while, we had a couple songs, and I had this limousine company that wanted to get in Opryland, start driving for the TV show. And I said, "Well, I'll get you in, get you started if you'll drive my band for free when we go to the recording studios." So I got a limo, a couple of them at times, and they'd carry our equipment down there, and we'd go in at 10 or 11 and start around midnight. So, they were generally through by then. And we did that for all those years, and I got them in. So we had free limousine service, and we went at night because nobody was there, people walking in and out. And we had our own engineer, who was Ronnie Light, famous engineer, did Waylon's for country music's first gold album. And he understood when I said I wanted to turn the 2-inch over and do something backwards. For some reason, he didn't mind doing any of that, so we were comfortable with him. And so we would record at night, and after a total of 5 years, we had 13 songs. And then I pressed an album, had my own publishing, my own record label. And then I had an agent in Hollywood, and I took it out there. But disco had disrupted this whole rock and roll thing. So my timing was bad. So I only had 1,000 copies pressed, and I gave away, about 300 copies, never sold any. And then I put the rest in a storage building. because when I went out to Hollywood, the biggest agent out there, and I'm not going to mention his name, he's passed away now, but he said, well, I gave it to the people, Chance, and what are we going to do with this now? Because of all of these problems that they're all freaked out. They're not really can think. And I said, well, don't worry about it. I just went on back home. I was out there a month and enjoyed myself. You know, my motto is wherever you go, have fun, because you're going to be there anyway. So I just enjoyed myself. I didn't get upset about nothing. I came home, left them in the storage building, and forgot about it for 32 years. I didn't have a band anymore. We just all broke up. And they went their own ways, and my guitar player got killed in a car wreck, so I can't get back and do no more. So I'm glad that 32 years later, this label called me from Philadelphia, Paradise of Bachelors, and it stunned me. I was working for Cowboy Jack Clements, Country Music Hall of Famer, for 8 years, and they called there, and I happened to answer the phone. And I told the man, he said, who is this? I'm looking for Chance Martin, who did an album, In Search, by Chance. I said, well, I'm Chance Martin. And the voice, he didn't say nothing. I said, hello. He said, I'm so nervous I can hardly talk to you now. You know, because he found me after 6 months of looking for me. And I said, well, take a Valium, drink a beer, and call me back. And I hung up on it. I thought, you know, I thought it was a joke to begin with. So I just joked along. And about 15 minutes, he called me back. He said, I'm okay now. So anyway, I said, if you're serious, mail me, you know, $500. Send it to me. And then we'll continue with this. He said, okay. And then I signed the contract. They flew down, both owners, and stayed in Nashville 3 days and interviewed me each day. And they did a great job on a book and the album. And I'm really proud of the remake, as far as the album opens up with photos. And just something like that to happen to me. I only wanted a little recognition in Nashville, because it was country music. And I mean, this album's just out there, man, you know. And the reviews were always good, though, and crazy. But they'd always say masterpiece or genius or something, which, you know, I don't like to read reviews, and then it'd scare me at first, and then it'd mellow out to that, and then I felt okay about it. Don't believe what you read, so it don't matter. But
Well, by any means, it was one of the most eclectic albums ever recorded in Nashville, I think. It's as if like somebody like Frank Zappa would have come to Nashville to make a record.
They mentioned him and me in places in other interviews. He'd got a lot of coverage. They sent a New York lady down there to, talk to me and interview me and take pictures. And she was quite nice, cute, wasn't married. And she came out to the house where I live, her and a guy, and hung out some more after the shoot and talking to me. So they were enjoying their time with me, too, and I appreciate that, because I enjoyed the time with them, like I do with you and doing my radio show here.
Yeah. Did you know at that time that the album kind of became a cult classic because it started selling on eBay for hundreds of dollars? Were you aware of that, or did those people tell you that?
Well, I wasn't aware of it, and no, they didn't tell me either. All of a sudden, I get this phone call again from a stranger, and I think they were in Texas, and they wanted to know if I had some copies. And they told me they'd give me $50 a copy and buy several. And I thought, well, hey, I happen to have a few copies, so 50 a piece, and they wanted maybe $500 or $600 worth. That leaves me plenty. So I sold them to them. And I said, now, what are y'all going to get for him? And he said, well, I'd like to tell you, but maybe you wouldn't sell them to me for 50. I said, no, that's fine. 50's fine. I don't care what you sell them for, 1,000 or whatever. Or you can sell them for $5. It's your business. He said, well, there's been a few going for $300. You know, so I said, well, okay, good. So I said, send me a box exactly for that many albums with the packing and the money in it. And they did, you know, with the money. And I just stuck them in and mailed them back, postage. They paid the postage and everything I asked. And then later on, another one out of New Orleans called me and did the same thing. And that's the 2 times when I found out about eBay and the price. And I thought they were kidding, but it wasn't a joke. It's true. Which I could have used that other $250.
Yeah, and he must be feeling pretty good too to know that actually there's such a demand for a record that initially, you know, you couldn't find a label for it, I guess.
Well, I had a label. I wasn't looking for a label. I was looking really for, well, the major label was my first stop, you know, because I had full control of this. I could make a deal with anybody. But, you know, that didn't happen. And I went around still all in Hollywood and dropped off an album, and I got letters from all the major labels. I still went out and hand-delivered it to front desk like an idiot. But it still lays them around, you know. So I did that for fun, too. We enjoyed walking around in Hollywood and going up to the Capitol building. So I got nice letters telling me, you know, they can't use this at this time, that kind of generic letter, and I kept all of those. And, you know, that's the reason I did it, because I knew I'd get a letter.
Yeah. So after you worked for Johnny Cash initially, you mentioned that you kept doing some more TV related.
Well, I was doing that while I was doing this rock album.
Yeah,
that's what paid for it.
And you worked on a Grammy show, and there's a story that also involves Ringo Starr and Harry Nilsson. What's that story?
Oh, you know, I became really famous with the cue card business. Hollywood tried to buy me out. They wanted me to do the dating game and the newlywed game. Right in the middle of the Johnny Cash show, they wanted to take it and trade, let me go there. I said, why would I do that? Johnny Cash, you want to give me the dating game? Well, you crazy? You know, get out of town. So I got another shot. I did some hee-haw cue cards. That was a lot of fun and working. And then I actually got an opportunity to audition to do the Grammys in Nashville. They hadn't been back. They was at the Tennessee Theater on Church Street, and Andy Williams was the host that year. I can't remember what Grammy Award number was, but anyway, I auditioned and then I had to see Marty Peseta and that other famous producer, Pierre Cossette. Audition to them, and I said, well, I'm going to have 1,000 in advance. I'm just that kind of guy at young age. And they said, no problem, gave me this check, and that told me I had the job. I mean, they cut it, and the girl did, and ran in and ran back, and before I knew it, I was taken down to the theater, and they were showing me around, and I figured I'm going to have about 2,000 pounds of cards and have this big easel built. And so I'm all set up after all the panic. The cue cards are all printed, and they are about 2,000 pounds of them on an easel that are huge. Out about 10 rows back at the theater in the middle. So since I was going to, actually, I told them I was going to retire from cue cards and give the company to a guy for $1. And so Channel 5 came down, CBS affiliate, and interviewed me about that and shot it for the news. And so here comes the people in to do the Grammys, and Ringo Starr comes in, and he's at the hotel, turns the news on and sees me, right? So now they're walking in, they're coming to the rehearsal at the theater for the Grammys. They're walking down the aisle at the theater, and I'm, 3/4 the way down. So I'm the first person they see because there's no people in the audience. And he stops and said, "You're Chance Martin, the world's largest cue card holder." He said, "I'm Ringo Starr." I said, "Oh, I know who you are." And he said, "I want you to meet my friend Nilsson Smilson. This is Chance Martin." And I thought, my goodness, man, I'm peaking again on this cue card business. How good does it get when you're retiring and Ringo comes up to you and knows your name? If I hadn't have done that little story, he wouldn't have never done that. It's kind of like when I met Bob Dylan on Johnny Cash's TV show. Johnny Cash says, "Hey, Chance, come here. I want you to meet my friend Bob Dylan." And I'll walk over, and they're sitting together there in a set there on the Opry stage, rhyming. And he just looks at me, and I don't stick my hand out because Bob doesn't. And he leans over and whispers in John's ear. And then he leans back, kind of looks at me. And Johnny said, "Bob said it was good to meet you, Chance." Is that a great one or not?
Yeah.
I'll take that over a handshake any day, because that's more exciting to tell that story.
Absolutely.
I shook Bob Dylan's hand. So what?
Yeah. And after you did those world tours with Johnny Cash, you also did some shows with some other, like, rockers. You worked some with, like, Alice Cooper.
Well, here in Nashville, yeah. And Alice Cooper was really a nice guy. I set the guillotine up where he cut the head off. And me and Alice walked around. He wanted to walk around the auditorium here, the municipal auditorium, and he wanted me to show him where the restroom was. And I said, "Well, you got one here in your dressing room. It's about 10 feet away." He said, "Well, no, I just want to walk around." He said, "Let's just walk around and talk." And I thought, well, cool, I just met him then, and we're talking and walking, and we talk about golf a little. I mean, some odd stuff, And then we passed the men's room. I said, "There it is." He said, "Oh, they got to be another one." And we went all the way around, He goes all the way around at 360 degrees, and he picked one out. And I just waited outside in the hallway, and he came out, and he went back, and he says, "Anything you want, let me know." That was kind of my thing there, other than working the show and the guillotine. But opportunities just to spend time with somebody, He was the first guy doing rock Broadway type stuff, man, that I'd ever seen. And I worked some Broadway plays in Nashville when they come around on tour. But they're not, I don't enjoy them like I do rock concerts or, the Rolling Stones. And I met Mick Jagger. He came to Johnny Cash show. But nobody knew he was there. John didn't. So after the concert, John just had left immediately after the show. And I'm getting ready to go up there and tell the stage crew what to do, take this out and this, fly that in, get this show out of town and moving on. And all of a sudden, there's a guy standing on the stage, in the middle of the stage with his back to me when I'm walking up on the stage. And I spun this guy around because they're flying a pipe in. I said, "Hey, man, you got to get off the stage." And I spun him around, and I said, "Excuse me, Mick." It was Mick Jagger. And I said, what are you doing?" He said, I was wanting to see Johnny Cash." And I said, "Well, he's left the building already." I said, "But I'll tell you what, I'll take you to him, to his suite in the hotel. if you can give me a ride to the hotel. He said, okay. So he had Bianca with him. And I said, y'all sit over in the wings in 2 chairs in about 15 minutes. Can you wait 15 minutes? Yeah. So they sat over and waited on me, and then I got Mick Jagger driving me. Oh, it's moments like that, man.
Yeah. You also got to meet Michael Jackson, a young Michael Jackson.
Oh, yeah. I played Frisbee with him, man, when he was a young boy with the Jackson 5. It was in the Municipal Auditorium as well. And during the sound check, he was out there wanting to flip Frisbee, so we got out there, and they hadn't put the seating in the middle, so we ran around throwing Frisbee, and I was throwing it back and forth to him. We had about 3 or 4 Frisbees. They just broke out a bunch of them. And I just was throwing them with little Michael, never knowing how big he was going to be someday. But he was pretty good with a Frisbee. He kept me moving. Yeah.
And you also ended up writing a song with Townes Van Sant.
Well, Townes Van Sant. Yeah, and some lady poured out and knocked a drink over on it. Made me and Townes mad, and we got up and left. That was it.
So that was the end of that song?
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah. It was at the ASCAP meeting. We should have been listening, but we were writing a song.
All right. It's a good story, though.
Yeah, I kind of like to have those lyrics, but at least I got to know Townes Van Sant. Another great thing.
Absolutely. And you got to work on some movies, too, like Robert Altman's Nashville.
How
did that come about?
That was fun. Well, the union gave me the job, and that was a long movie. I think it took us 8 weeks or something along like that, and so it was good money. And Robert Altman was really a different kind of director to watch and to work with, and that was really the reason why I wanted to be on it. And actually, I had his son working with me, which was even more interesting. And he was younger than me, and I knew more about it, I think, than he did, and he appreciated it, and he knew how to be and act, and he was good at what he did. And so we enjoyed each other, and that was a pretty wild movie. It really was. We went to the Parthenon, we were all over the place, interstates and wrecks and all kinds of things. It was good.
What was like? What did you have to do? What was your
I was
job
working in sound. I was the wireless man. I wired all the actors, and there was a bunch of them. He had 8 things going on at one time. You know how he is. He always had a lot of stories going at the same time in most of his shows, movies. And he's gone now, the late and great. But I'm glad that I got to work around him.
And you worked on more movies after that, too.
John Alvison was the director on this movie. I worked with WW and the Dixie Dance Kings with Burt Reynolds. And that was really a lot of fun because it was done here in Nashville. It was a period movie back in the 50s. And everything on Lower Broad had to be changed, and we had to cover up the Magic Fingers sign down there. That was when the massage parlors took over Lower Broad. Remember, well, you weren't around here. Oh, they just about run. They did run it, but they were filming this, and they paid, and we'd cover up the signs and paid them, Everything had to be changed. Everything you seen had to be from the 50s. So being the set decorator on that with another guy, the real set decorator from Hollywood, he broke his arm or something, fell or hurt himself, and he just stayed at the hotel. And we went out and shopped and got all of the stuff. Rent it, buy it, with a truck, and put it in the gas station, and they'd blow it up, and then You know, we had a gas station blow up, and then we had to put it back together. We're gonna let's do that one again. You know, that take two. You know, so putting it back together is not a lot of fun.
But
But you know, you had a lot of great stars in that. I think Don Williams was in that, and Jerry Reed was in it. And remembering all of the actors in some of those is kind of vague to me, but I got the main ones that I liked. And yeah, and then I worked with Sean Penn and Christopher Walken on a movie. This time I didn't want to work the movie; I just wanted to go down. So I got this agent is get me a bit part in it, different agent, so I could just go down and hang out and have a bit part. So I got to hang out with Sean Penn and Christopher Walken and watch them act. And then they said they were going to a Kwanzaa Hut place where they kept all their stolen stuff they stole. At Close Range is the name of the movie. Have you seen it?
Yeah.
I'm driving this forklift inside that Kwanzaa Hut, and this actor jumps up on the front of it, and I bring him in. And he was scared to death. He's been in a lot of movies. I can't think of his name, but kind of a method type actor. And he's been in Bond movies, all kinds of movies, man. And he said, "Can you drive this forklift? I'm a little afraid." And I said, "That's why they hired me. I'm a professional forklift driver. Get on." But when we were sitting out there waiting on our bit parts, they said, "Anybody here drive a forklift?" I raised my hand. I said, "Well, I'm a professional forklift driver." And so they got me a scene. And you can see me in the movie, so that was the only reason I went. And to watch them.
yeah,
So I used to get to do a lot of things I wanted to do.
yeah. Well, you certainly have one of the most interesting lives of anybody I know.
Oh yeah, I'm happy with my life, and I miss all my friends that have died on me, though. You know,
Yeah.
Johnny Cash and Waylon. And the list is so long.
And somebody else that was really important to you was Cowboy Jack Clements. How did you hook up with him?
Well, through his engineer, who was 17, David R. Ferguson, they call him the Ferg. He's did all of Johnny's American records, engineered them. He was the gopher when he first went to work for Jack, but I'd met him, and he wanted to introduce me to Cowboy, and that's how I met him over at the studio. But you know, on this rock album, I recorded 2 songs at his historic Jack Clements studio. Has a historic marker over there now, the Sound Emporium.
Yeah.
I didn't know Jack, but I went over because I'd heard of him and knew that the studio existed back in, I don't know, 1980 or something. I went there. It was a little expensive to go in at midnight. I think it's $150 an hour. And the first hour, my thing is the first hour we don't do anything. We just sit there and let the instruments breathe. And the guys may want to have a beer and relax, talk to the engineer. I would about what we're going to do. But the first hour we paid for to do nothing. So that was $150 to get the band comfortable. So I thought, I can't do this no more, and I got to get a better deal, you know, because I got a long ways to go here. So, but anyway, I later met Cowboy Jack, and then after me and Ferg did some recordings and made up this name, Alamo Jones, for some fake commercials we wanted to do just for fun. And then I had those fake commercials of Alamo Jones and this name we made up. And so I took the name Alamo Jones and decided to, I'd never been a disc jockey. Remember, I went to school to be one in the 60s, and now I went in to work for Johnny Cash in television on ABC, so I never got to do any radio. And until 2005 when I had this CD that New York came down to get Jack Clements to do a radio show on Sirius Radio before Sirius XM joined. And they told Jack he needs a sidekick on the show. And Ferg was up in the studio and heard them and was with them. In the meeting, I was down. I had an office at Jack's at the time. And I was down in my office, and Ferg came down and said, "You got that CD we did on them fake commercials?" I said, "Yeah." So I gave it to him. He went up there and played it for this guy from New York, and he said, "That's the man." I don't think Jack even knew who the guy was, and I'm there all the time, because I used that name. And so when I went to work, I became Alamo Jones, his sidekick for 8 years. So we did a lot of shows, 8 years, every weekend together. And that was a lot of fun because, see, the reason I was hanging around, he started with Johnny Cash at Sun Records, and they were friends. So I thought, there's a lot to both them two guys being still good friends. And John came to see Jack a lot over here at his studio on Belmont. And I was working there, so I got to see John even though I wasn't working for him anymore. And that was always fun. We'd do dueling caches, I'd say I'm Johnny Cash, and he'd say he's Johnny Cash, and we'd argue back and forth who was really Johnny Cash. We would do that in front of strangers, though. We did that several times all over the place together. He thought that was the greatest thing. And he knew that I used that when he was alive to get things to work. Like on the road when the auditorium wasn't cooperating and the stage crew didn't want to do nothing. I'd go get on a payphone. They didn't have cell phones then. And call and be Johnny Cash. I'd call the auditorium and tell them, "Do I need to come down there? I understand you're having a lot of problems down there with the crew, and get them tore all to pieces, the steward of the job." And then I just hang up and walk back around the auditorium, walk back up to the crew sitting down. They jumped up and started bowing almost, And I said, what came over y'all? You decided you want to do something? Yes, sir. What's next? What's first? All of a sudden, they're just right on it. And I'd tell John that, and he loved that. And I'd use it when I was not doing anything, trying to get a room at a hotel in Gatlinburg or somewhere. And they said, "We're sold out." And I'd hang up and call back and tell them I was Johnny Cash, and they had a room. So, it was a lot of fun. It really was.
And he named you the voice in black too, didn't he?
Yeah, he did. And I didn't ever think about it or use it until I did a country album. The only one I've done, and 4 or 5 years ago, called Alamo Jones, The Voice in Black. And I wrote all the songs on that, and I put it out on his birthday. Of course, he was passed away. I wish he would have been alive when I did the album. He would have liked it.
Yeah. And would you mind describing a little bit how the Cowboy Arms Hotel and Recording Spa was like?
There was not another place in Nashville like it. It was well known that a lot of people had their own keys. John Prine maybe. Lots of people. There's people hanging out like Alan Reynolds and John Prine. Alan Reynolds did all Garth Brooks hits, and even bought one of Jack's studios. And Alan Reynolds and Cowboy Jack Clements were big friends, and Dickie Lee. He relocated those guys in life from Beaumont, Texas to Memphis to Nashville, back to Memphis. Wherever he'd move, he'd convince them to move there. And as you see, when they finally got here, it all worked out. But anyway, Did I answer that?
Absolutely. And that's where they shot part of that infamous movie, too, where Johnny Cash is in it and all that.
Oh, the home movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, Cowboy Jack Clements' home movies are George Jones was a big Shakespeare fan or something. I don't remember the name of it, but it won the Nashville Film Festival, and it was fun to see myself on the screen in a theater as a cartoon character, because I played Shakespeare. And I told them when they asked me to do it, you know, Cowboy and all, the director that was going to put Jack's home movies together, they had to shoot new stuff to segue it all together. And they wanted me to be Shakespeare. And I said, well, with a Johnny Cash kind of voice. And I said, well, I took the director outside, walked him around, and I said, I'm not going to wear the collar, and I'm not going to dress up like that. So I'll tell you what I'm going to do, and I'm not going to shoot anything out here in this hot summer's outside in the heat. As long as we do something inside, I've thought about all of this, so I've come to the conclusion that I'll do this if I'll sell you a great suggestion for this part for $50 if you want it. Do you want to hear it? If you use it, you have to pay me $50. He said, okay, I want to hear it. It's worth $50 to hear it. I said, if you don't, if you don't like it, you don't have to pay. I said, I want to be a cartoon character, left-handed, guitar playing with a beer, shaky beer. Shaky is his nickname, Shake. So have you seen the movie?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, that was all my idea. And then they used it on Cowboy Jack once in the car. And he gave me the $50. So there again, sometimes my suggestions are hard to turn down.
Yeah.
You really have to know what it needs in order to suggest something like that to a director. Because you're really taking a big chance on it, because you've already said you wouldn't go and dress up. So, I didn't really care if I was going to be in it or not, but if I was, it was going to have to be my way.
Yeah.
That's the outlaw country way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So you've been doing the Cowboy Jack Clements show with him for a while, and then his health kind of got worse, and your role became more prominent, and when he passed, you took over that show. How was that a natural for you, or is that something you had to think about a lot?
No, it was something I was hoping that would happen when I first went to work for Cowboy on doing the show. I didn't know how long, but 8 years is a pretty good while. And I loved every show we did. But when he got sick, and he was still working on the show, it was my first experience to work with or be around anybody that was getting dementia and Alzheimer's type thing. He never really had that, but he was he couldn't remember anything except for his songs. Yeah. That's how that works. Glenn Campbell, he didn't hardly know anything, but he could still sing his songs, And that's pretty wild. It's something to think about. But anyway, it was kind of hard because it hurt me that he was getting that sick, and I watched him take his last breath, and that's something I don't want to ever do again. I didn't watch Mom and Dad die, and I never watched anybody else die, and I watched Jack. I was in there with him and on his bed and his son, just me and his son, and that was a sad day. And then that's the day that they gave me the show. The New York guy was here, came down, and he told me I wanted it to be your show now. So it's about 4 years ago, wasn't it? Something like that.
And it's still going strong. And about, I guess, a year and a half ago, you guys moved the show to Creative Workshop, where we are today.
That's right. Now, I've known Buzz Kaysen, that owns the studio, a great artist, songwriter. I've known him for years and years, and I really, I've been coming here for First Tuesday gift, where we get together and have a prayer meeting and guest speakers and all kinds of great songwriters, you know. And over all those years, I've just felt so comfortable here, like home or something. You know, it's a family type feeling you get, and a spiritual thing to me. And Parker, my engineer,
Who is Buzz's son?
and me and him just click and get this job done so fast, so easy, and so enjoyable, you know, that it's like meant to be almost, you know. I can't really prove that, but but I do feel so good about doing it here. And it sounds good. The show sounds great from here.
Yeah, and
Because this studio's been here since 1970. And it's historic itself.
It is. And one other thing that
Now, Jack Clements had the first studio in Nashville in 1970, and then there was Buzz Kaysen. So they were the first two independent studios in Nashville.
Yeah. Another thing is neat. You got reunited with the grand piano who was on the Johnny Cash show.
Boy, when I found that out, and, you know, Bill Walker Orchestra, you know. Now, when you listen to Sunday Morning Coming Down with Johnny Cash singing, he's reading my cue cards. He did not know the lyrics. And I would not put the word home on there. You know, Hollywood and ABC and all them that said you can't use the word stone. Lord, I wish I was stone. You do, Lord, I wish I was home. I went to John, of course, like I always did, right before that moment. And I showed him the cue cards, and I said, John, I put the real lyrics. Chris is up there up in the balcony, over on stage right. And I said, I just think it needs to be Chris's words, and you do that. And he says, I do too, Chance. So I said, you can blame me. Read the cards. Then you can say, if they panic, you say, well, I'm just reading the cards. So anyway, he said it.
Yeah.
And then so when you listen to it, I heard it today, and on the radio, and it's live when Bill Walker's playing. All of that's right. Here's the piano now in the Creative Workshop.
Yeah, it sure is. And
Yeah.
For me, just knowing.
So I got Bill Walker on my show.
Absolutely, and knowing that all these great people like Ray Charles and Jerry Lee Lewis, you know, played that piano.
I had
great.
Bill Walker on here, didn't I?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and that kind of stunned him. I called him out of nowhere, and of course he remembers me, and he really would do it, you know, and he did, and he was great. I liked him, liked his wife. They were both nice people, and they're still together. It's a beautiful thing, man.
Absolutely. So what does the future hold for you? Do you have any plans that you still would like to see come to fruition?
Well, you know, it's a little foggy to me. I feel pretty good about everything I've done, and I'm not sure if I'm going to ever do any more songs or not. I'm trying to come to that conclusion in my own personal head, because at times I feel like, well, no, I'm not going to record anymore. But then again, I still want to, you know. I don't know about doing a whole album, but I'd like to do, you know, a couple singles every now and then for fun. I want to continue doing the radio show as long as they'll let me, because it's just a natural thing for me, and I enjoy it. And so, I don't know. You know, Nashville is not the same as it was. Never will be. And I'm glad that I grew up here, you know. I came out of high school not too far from over here in South Nashville, Glencliff, And things have really changed. Parking, for one thing, is so expensive. You know, I did so many shows at the Bridgestone Arena down there, 8 years on Lower Broad, and their headquarters, the Tower of Nashville's headquarters. It's nice. It's pretty cool, like a fantasy place. But you got to pay to park, and if you have guests, they have to pay, and if they're playing instruments like an upright bass, it's a lot of work on these people to do a show free, to promote their record. So Jack was this way. He thought, we need to do this here at his studio. And we did a few there, but he didn't want to pay the engineer. So he'd go down there and let his producer engineer it. But he really wanted to do it at his house all the time, you know. But, you know, he had a driver for us, so it wasn't so bad. You know, they'd drop us off and pick us up, so I like that. Because it can get bad down there during the CMA Awards. I like to never got in. They wasn't going to let me go in. I said, I got to do a show. They don't care. You don't have the proper ID. CMA? I thought, no, but I worked the first 7 or first 15 or whatever it was, and I know more about the CMA than you do. You're just a security guy that ain't going to let me go to work for Sirius XM in that building. There's something wrong with this. And so they said, well, you can go, but you can't go this way. You got to walk, 3 blocks that way and go down. And I'm thinking, so the time I walked the extra mile and got up to the thing, and I was wore out, tired and ready to sit down and not do a show. So I thought, well, I got to get something a little more. I'll get there eventually. And that's where I'm at now. I've eventually got that goal, 1.5 years, that now my guests can have it nice, peaceful, free parking. Berry Hill's what's happening, man.
Yeah.
You leave Berry Hill, you go toward Nashville, you get a screw loose. You need to go toward this way to Mount Juliet and get out of town.
Yeah. And you're surrounded by all this history in here, too, so
It feels like my place where I live. It didn't make my wife happy. She put up with it 17 years. She wanted to decorate. Of course, all ladies do. Hank 3 has that problem, with his place. His wife never got to do any decorating, even in the bathroom, because he had it covered with posters but I didn't ever know that, and she finally said, take your museum and get out. So we're best friends, but she didn't really say that, but I think that's a good line for it.
Absolutely.
That's what I want her to say.
Yeah. And we're so glad and honored that you decided to come here to do your show, and we'll always, be here for you.
Well, everybody here is true, sweet, great people, man. Buzz, Patricia, Buzz's secretary, and you work with, and Parker. I mean, how could you not? When you go to a place, you want to feel like you love everybody, and trust them, and care for them. It's a big feeling to me. I mean, if you can't get that, heck, why do it?
Absolutely. Well, I think, we covered a lot of ground today, and I would like to thank you for being my guest today, and just wish you all the very best.
And I wish you the very best, and I'll tell you what, it was great to sit down with you and do this. It really was. And we've talked about it. We finally got around to having the time to do this, and so this goes out on your webcast?
Yeah, it's going to be on website. It's also going to be on YouTube and iTunes and all that. So and I'll make sure that people know about it.
Okay, great, man. I guess we covered a lot of ground. At least we picked it up from the time I was 23.
Yeah, maybe we'll have to do another one and we'll cover the first 23.
Now, I think you said something earlier before we started the interview. Have you got a second?
Absolutely.
About what made me first decide about music, right?
Yeah.
Is that exactly the question?
Absolutely.
When I was a little bitty boy, let's see, what year was it? Well, I was probably maybe 9, 8. I'm trying to think of the year, 54 or 5. I didn't really know what radios were, you know. And my mom and dad had this little wooden radio, and they'd listen to the Grand Ole Opry and stuff. But I never listened. I never paid much attention to the radio, period. One day I was cutting through in the house. I was a little boy and still playing with cars and stuff, and cutting through, and I heard this voice come through that little box, you know, little wooden box. That's what I called it. I didn't know it was a radio. And I said, "Mama, how'd that voice get in that box? Who is that?" And she said, "I think they said Elvis, somebody." And it turned out it was Elvis Presley. That's All Right, Mama. And that's the first song I heard in my life that drew me to wanting to know what that box is, which became a radio. And so I was a little sheltered, wasn't I, in a way, but that's what drew me to music, and I worked with Elvis some, so I got to do that.
Yeah. And now your voice is coming out of that wooden box every week.
Yeah, oh yeah, and car radios and stuff, yeah. And it's something when you go through little so many years, and what goes around comes around. Mm-hmm. So I didn't plant any bad seeds. I planted good seeds, and like Mom and Dad taught me, and it all came back pretty good. You know, like this interview, you wouldn't be interviewing me if you didn't think I was interesting.
Oh yeah, that's been one of my favorite interviews so far. So thank you so much for your time.
Andreas, it was a pleasure, buddy, and you take care of yourself, and maybe someday if I do something great again, we'll get back again.
Sounds good to
and
me.
Do another interview, an update.
Absolutely.
All right, pal. Take care of yourself.
You too. Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
This was the 9th episode of the Crazy Chester Radio Hour. We taped it at the Creative Workshop Recording Studio in Berry Hill, my favorite studio in Nashville. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed it. See you next week.